Okay, so we're coming in a little late on this, but yes, squash and stretch. Squash and stretch, the first of the 12 principles. Now, the reason it's important, the reason it's number one, the reason it's not just like some people think it just means make it look cartoony, right? Like squash and stretch, that means that it's all rubbery looking, right? It makes it more fun. But actually, squash and stretch is one of the things that is telling you the most about the physics that is happening in this scene, right? We understand that an object is traveling with force, right? There's some energy behind it, right? And it's hitting this wall, and it has two options, right? If I throw something at a wall, it's either got to absorb that energy and redirect it, or it's going to break something, right? So if I throw a rubber ball at a wall, it's going to absorb that energy in the squash, right? It loses some of it to the impact of the wall, and it's going to redirect it back out. If I fire a cannon at a wall, it's going to blast right to the wall. That energy has to go somewhere, right? Energy can't be created or destroyed. It can just change form. And what we're seeing here is energy changing form. And this kinetic energy, kinetic energy, the energy in motion, we're seeing it change form by redirecting, by causing this object to bend. Anybody ever been in the top of a really tall building and you can feel it like? Isn't that
I prefer not to.
Yeah, it happens. And that's kind of scary. You're like, whoa, the building's going to tip over. What's happening? But the alternative is the building breaking, right? If it doesn't bend, it breaks, right? If you throw an egg at a wall, it doesn't squash or stretch, it breaks, right? So you get those options, right? And squash and stretch is what happens when energy interacts with other objects and doesn't cause it to break, right? Now this is interesting because this means we can leverage squash and stretch to make our audience believe that these inanimate things that we're creating on our screen are thinking and acting on their own. If you want a good example of that, we can look at, just always open it with this. How about that? Sorry, all the videos are opening slower. We can look at Junior Asparagus. Right? I love VeggieTales. And the interesting thing about VeggieTales, anybody, how many of you like VeggieTales? I feel like people love VeggieTales in the Barney the Dinosaur or something like category, and I'm like, that just means I'm not for sure you've watched a full episode, because I have laughed myself sick at VeggieTales. It is so funny.
Have you seen the newer animation for it? It's really.
Is it not as good? I knew DreamWorks acquired them and their.
Yeah, the new animation is terrifying.
It's like
I hate the
it's kind of like a storybook look to it, but because it's still in the 3D, it doesn't look right
That's
at all.
Disgusting.
I like it. Not holding back.
It went from charming and clever. Now it's just kind of stupid humor, the bad kind of stupid humor.
Yeah, that's nice. Mike Naraki, I think, was a big part of that humor, and I don't know if he's still involved.
You can never hate a silly song with Larry.
Oh yeah, like the cheeseburger song.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to the subject. The interesting thing about Junior Asparagus is he has no limbs, right? He has no arms, he has no legs, and really. I feel like that's the type of joke my wife would roll her eyes at when I make it. She's like, really, Greg? So Junior Asparagus has no limbs, right? But we completely believe that he is moving across the screen under his own power completely because of squash and stretch. We believe that when he squashes down, he's building up that energy. When he stretches back out, he's exerting that energy against the floor, right? It's causing him to sort of travel to the air in an arc. Foreshadowing. And then he stretches out again right before he lands, because if you've ever tried to land with your knees bent, you probably hurt yourself. And then he's squashing again to sort of absorb that impact, right? If we look at the mechanics of a jump, it is completely squash and stretch, right? We get this squash for this anticipation down, this stretch when you push off, you're up in the air, you got to stretch out again, and you squash again, right? Even things that you don't think squash and stretch do, right? Because the alternative is break, right? And that would make golf even more boring. Right? Like, oh, I hit this ball, it shattered everywhere. I had to pick it up pieces. Right? Like, that's not fun. Right. So a golf ball does. It squashes just a little bit. And actually, that firmness of it is why it like sort of pushes off and travels so hard from that. So we get these three principles of these three laws of motion from Isaac Newton, right? So these are stuff we'll kind of harken back to periodically, but one is for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? And what we're seeing is that energy can't not react, right? It has to react in some way. Like if something hits it, or if it hits something, it can't just die, right? And it's not, or it can't just like stop like dead, right? And we've kind of the thing about that is it's not that we're like that does not adhere to Isaac Newton's laws. It's more like we've seen things move for so long. I have no idea what that is. We've seen things move for so long that we recognize when things are not obeying the laws of physics, right? And so squash and stretch really helps us to convey that. Now, the interesting thing about squash and stretch is, again, things that you think are not squashing and stretching actually are a lot of times. So, like your skull, right? This is from the slow-mo guys. I have a much better version of this somewhere, too.
Your skull squishes?
Yeah. So, you know how babies have a soft spot?
Yeah.
Yeah, because if it was all one piece, it would have more of a chance of cracking, right? And so your skull is actually multiple pieces that are not connected together, and even once they do fuse, it's not completely hard. It's got a little bit of malleability to it, because you don't want your skull cracking in and puncturing your brain. You know, right? Yes.
A good website you can use to show this is heelslap.com.
Heel slap. I have a feeling, but based on her reaction, I have a feeling I'm not going to Google that.
I promise, like, it is safe for work. It is like really funny. You can use your mouse and like you control the heel with your mouse. And just...
Oh, heel slap. Okay, I thought, yeah. that seems like fun. So this is interesting though. Like, look at how much his head is deforming, and like you see this picture and you're like, oh, well, I mean, I hope he had good insurance, right? But like, if you watch this in real time, he goes, right, and then sort of stumbles to the side. He's perfectly fine. Our bodies are meant to do that. But, like, look at his bottom lip. His bottom lip's dragging behind.
Yeah, where does tooth go?
Even the tip of his nose, right? Where did his tooth go? I think it's still in there. I think it's just
The amount of force, though, like, that soccer ball is not being thrown solid.
Hey, you can watch the video. It's on YouTube. Like it's a hard hit. It probably gave him a mild headache, but it's not like it knocked him out.
No. I can feel that picture.
I know.
Because I played 2 years of soccer, and I can feel that. That happened to me in a class.
How much do you think you got paid for that?
It's his YouTube page, so like they got millions of views. So I think a lot. It's super slow-mo guys or whatever. Yeah, and they have some great stuff that you can really start to study the laws of physics there. So now it's important to recognize with squash and stretch, we're talking about volume retention. This isn't the best illustration of this. But the way I like to think of this is your object has to retain that same amount of mass, right? If we're squashing and stretching a ball, that ball, like think of it as being a rubber ball being filled with some liquid, right? Let's say this ball is filled with a gallon of orange juice, right? I don't know why I like orange juice. I like orange juice. If you stretch that, it still has a gallon of orange juice in it. If you squash that, it still has to feel like it has a gallon of orange juice. In this bottom version here, this one feels like it has a half a gallon, and that one up there feels like it has a gallon and a quarter or something, right? In comparison. And that makes us go, oh, the laws of physics just changed there. Like if I squash down to jump, I don't get lighter. Trust me, I've tried it. You don't change your mass, right? It's reproportioning this mass or redistributing this mass in a different shape, right? Now another element of squash and stretch that's important to remember, you'll see a lot in 2D animation, which is a smear frame. Anybody seen smear frames in 2D animation? Yeah. It's when you pause it, like right in the middle of a fast motion,
Oh,
and it looks really weird.
Hans's
Um,
face.
Huh?
Hans's face.
Hans's yeah. There's so many of them. I will Google this off screen.
It looks like a fix box. What is this called?
Smear frame. So if you just Google smear frame, let me check to make sure. Okay. You will see them all over the place, right? These are examples from animation. I love this one of Homer, right? And what they're doing is they're trying to make that impression of stretch right in the middle of emotion.
These are mean.
And so they are warping the character to get all of that feeling of stretch out of one drawing, right? And so this is another element of it that we can kind of leverage as we're creating animation as well. Okay, so that was squash and stretch. That one's pretty complex, and I like delving into it deep. So for this next one, let's look at a comic really quick. I love this comic. Let me zoom in here a little bit for you. Can I? No, wrong way. There we go. Zoom in.
You're walking down the street and you see Scooby-Doo looking at you like a smear friend. What do you do? Ron,
So I don't know if y'all can see this.
his shaggy you out of behind.
So I like this one for anticipation because like this is just a 2-panel comic, right? Anybody know what this is?
Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin and Hobbes. One of the greatest comics that's ever been written. So the first one's some reading part of a poem, and then the second panel is just one long panel, right? What's happening in this? That second panel.
Whack.
Gonna pounce, right? Like, so it's only 2 panels. There's not a third panel, which would be a hilarious panel of a tiger mauling a child, right? Like, it's not. We don't have that panel, and we don't need that panel, right? Because everybody can read that and know exactly what's getting ready to happen, right? Anticipation is an action that happens to let you know there's going to be another action happening, right? And it's not always somebody's intention, right? Like, I'm going to pick up this bottle off the table. It's not like, I need everybody to know I'm going to pick up that bottle. Look at my hand. Here it goes. Picking up the bottle, right? But it's just sort of innately how things seem to work, right? Before a character can jump, they have to anticipate down, right? Before they can pitch a ball, you have to anticipate back, right? And that's sort of, some of it is in the nature of the motion, right? Like I can throw a ball without anticipating back, just kind of do like that, but it's not going to have as much force to it, right? That anticipation is like building up the action before the action, right? And that's actually how I usually like to think of it. It's the action that lets you know another action is getting ready to happen. Now, animators will sometimes use that to clue the audience in subliminally that something is getting ready to happen, right? Like if I were going to pick up this bottle, right before I pick up the bottle, maybe I'll pull my hand up like this just a little bit before swiping through and picking up the bottle. Almost knocked it over. Right? So it'd be a very quick little like note before it happens. And what that does is if you're watching the character's face and you see that hand sort of pull back, your eyes will dart down to the hand and you won't miss the thing the animator wanted you to see, right? So anticipation though is the one of the things to remember is it's not always an action that happens in the opposite direction. Like it often is, like before a character can jump up, they have to squash down. Before a character can throw a ball that way, they need to pull the ball back this way. But sometimes it's just in preparation. It can be in the way you're moving toward that object, right? Like as I'm reaching for this bottle, maybe I anticipate up to reach for it, right? As I'm moving forward. So there's a lot of different things to know, but the thing to recognize is that anticipation is something that happens before a lot of motions, either for physicality reasons or for communication reasons as an animator, right? Okay, number 3, staging. So, staging consists of a couple of different things. And we get into this much deeper later, but where's somewhere else you've heard that phrase used before?
Did you say staging?
Mhm.
Theater?
In the theater, right? It's on a stage, right? How are you going to stage this performance, right? Staging is all of the elements in a shot, in a scene, in a piece, right? That helps you visually convey whatever your idea is the clearest, right? So some of that might include your composition, like how have you composed this shot? Like, are you really far away where the action is really small? If you're doing that, why are you doing that? Are you trying to show, are you trying to distance the audience from that for emotional reasons? Is your camera on a character really close so their head is filling up the entire shot, right? Are you filming two characters having a conversation? Are you standing behind one character and looking at the other? If you do that, maybe your staging is making the audience feel more of a kinship to the person they're standing behind, right? But it also, some of the elements of staging is just like, it's all the visual elements that communicate the idea the artist or the animator is trying to convey, right? And staging is a lot of this. So take the, let's take this one here, right? Don't worry about me, I'm okay, right? So do you believe him? Right? No, like, it's all right. I didn't need a Christmas present. It's okay. Don't worry about me. Right? Like there's something like all of that can change that sentence into something completely different, right? Versus, don't worry about me. I'm okay, right? That's like, hold my beer. I got this. Where's the motorcycle, right? That's your staging can be completely different on two different things and carry a completely different idea. The staging is how you are presenting the action, presenting the info, presenting the imagery in a way to communicate your idea. Now, when it comes to animation, there are a couple of things that are very important about this. One of them is composition. Again, to keep bringing it back to it, Brad Bird is like one of the kings of this. I can't zoom in. Okay. His compositions are extremely strong, right? And what this does is it leads your eye exactly where he wants you to be looking, right? These big circles, they're neat design elements for a machine, but what they really do is they keep you looking at the two faces, right? The way he has staged this, even though you're really far away, you're looking the entire time at these two characters and their interaction together, right? If we sort of look at this, these lines, these purple lines you're seeing in here, we call those rule of thirds. So if you divide your scene into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, you'll see that interesting things are happening at these meeting points of those rules of thirds. And all of these elements in the background are leading our characters, or leading us to our character's face, right? Let's get this back here to stop. Again, even environmental elements are leading us to looking at the things he wants us to be looking at, right? Some of this is also line of action, like the angles of things that are happening in this to kind of feel like this distribution, like you got a single, a clump of threes, a single, right? So one of the things that an animator is going to utilize the most, though, especially if you start doing stuff with characters, is pose, right? So if you're going to animate a character, you can tell a lot about a character just from their pose. So let's look at these people here. So tell me something about them.
Friends.
They're strong, huh?
Like friends.
They're friends, right? What tells you that they're friends?
The way they're all together.
Yeah, they stand near each other. Well, they don't seem to be worried about touching each other, right? And like, in case this needs saying, you usually don't just walk up and touch strangers, right? You usually feel physically comfortable with people you're close to, right? So they, like these two right here, they at least know each other, right? What would you say about some of their personalities?
what they're going for?
You can't, you can't tell anything about these people, but you can tell a lot about their personality just by looking at their pose, right? Or their personality or their mindset at that time. They're confident. They're physically strong. They're not. I mean, like you can just tell by the way that they're standing. Like they have like, even though they're kind of making this like pose, like they seem fit in the way that they're holding themselves. Even the anatomy, I know that's part of in the pose, but you can tell that like there's very few beer guts in this one, right? And this pose right here on the end is so casually confident, right? Like it's the
I know I'm cool. But
yeah, I
I'm
know.
not sure.
Yeah, I can kick your butt, and I don't even have to like say that, right? All of that is conveyed with the pose, and we'll talk much more in depth about pose in character animation. But pose is composed of your line of action, which is that sort of this invisible line that flows through your character, your contrapposto, which is sort of your countering angles of your posture, and your silhouette. Right? And so when I talk about silhouette, I mean the shape that your pose makes in the whole form. If you blacked out or filled the entire shape with a solid color, can you still read? Can you still understand that pose? Right? And in this case, the silhouette's very clear. Right? You can tell just from the outline of this character that he's pointing. Right? Now, silhouette is something that we can control in how that how the audience sees stuff, and artists leverage that. Right? They leverage the fact that we are really good at spotting people's silhouettes. Right? And that's just something our eye and our brain's kind of trained to be able to read. And I'll prove it to you. Who are these people? TF2, right? And we can all tell that by their silhouettes. That was a conscious choice, right? They made that choice because this character may run by you super fast and like half a mile away, and you need to know, do I need to run after them to shoot them, or do I need to run away from them, right? Right.
Unless they have a bump.
Yeah, it's like a quick reaction. They all have very distinctive silhouettes for that reason, right? And some of that's just in the overall form, right? Like he's got this big chest, this wide stance, carrying a big, massive thing. This coat is very noticeable in the silhouette, right? This guy's kind of a little bit more bottom heavy, right? Thin, like so. All of these things are things that we can spot the silhouettes of really quickly, right? All right. Principle number 4, straight ahead and pose to pose. So this one's where it starts mixing up a little bit. Animation, like these two principles, or this principle, is about the way you would create animation. Right? And there are kind of two different methods that most animators use, particularly in 2D animation. You could use the straight ahead animation, which is you create frame 1, and then you create frame 2, and then you create frame 3, and then 4, and then 5. Or you could use pose to pose, which is like you create one key pose of a character in a position, and then you create the next position they're going to. So maybe that's frame 1 and frame 7. And once you get those two figured out, you in between the rest. You figure out 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? And that's tweening, right? And that's what we're kind of used to thinking of in traditional animation, right? Keyframe animators makes 1 and 5. The in-betweeners do those in-between drawings. And of course, you'll see these little timing charts on animations when we look at them. This is how the keyframe animator told the in-betweener how to space these things, how to make these things transition, right? So again, pose to pose is that's what that is we're talking about. Is that's a pose to pose animation. Right? Pose 1, Hogarth's head's down. Pose 2, he raises it. Right? You need to nail down those two poses, and then you can get the in-betweens after that. Now, in fact, most of what we've talked about in here has been that pose-to-pose animation, right? A walk cycle is this contact down, passing, up pose. These four very specific poses that are consistent in every walk, no matter what your proportions or what. Even quadrupeds have these, right? So when would we ever use straight ahead?
Like organic effects, like fire and that kind of thing.
Right. Fire isn't moving from pose A to pose B, right? It's very fluid and floppy, right? There's other things, like, let's say my character is stumbling and flailing, right? There may not be a very distinctive key pose, and the best way for me to do that is just to kind of work forward through it. There's actually another one, too, that you may not be thinking of, which is a type of animation, or a media of animation, that because of the nature of it, has to use straight ahead animation, which is stop motion. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute this one. But this is a Lego animation. This one's actually hilarious. It's like a Lovecraftian like summoning of a demon, and this Indiana Jones kind of guy like kicks in the door and shoots everybody up to like stop it, and it's followed up by a court case where they're like, you were violating our right to religious freedom for summoning this demon. And so it's bouncing back and forth between this like Lovecraft and this court case. It's actually really funny. But how they do this is they do frame one, and they take a picture, and then they move it a little bit, and they take another picture, right? You all probably did something like this in your GIF animation that you did, right? Did anybody do stop motion? I remember looking through them, but yeah. What was yours again?
It was an Iron Man.
Okay, yeah. I remember. I clicked through all of them, but I have two classes, so I can't remember which class was which. So, yeah, this one's really funny. I think it's called Call of Farkongwu. So it's very, yeah. And there's the court case. I feel like I kind of spoiled that one, but it's funny anyway. So there's two. Do it.
Was it made by a fan?
Yeah, this was before the Lego movies came out. This is one of the more famous ones. That, so there was a whole bunch of these that actually the reason the Lego movie really got made is because Lego stop motion animations were just exploding on YouTube. Everybody was making these like fan movies, and they're like, let's tap into that. Lego's actually a really smart company. Okay, so follow through, or I'm sorry, straight ahead and pose to pose is really just talking about these two different methods that are very good and have very good ways of making animation and have their time and place in which you would use them, right? Okay, follow through and overlapping action. Goodness gracious, I talk about this one a lot. And that's because this is one that young animators, people who are just getting started in this, have a really hard time sort of making this click, right? And it's because there's a lot of words. Actually, I have a whole lecture just on follow through and overlapping action. You'll probably see that one in like character animation or 3D animation, or animation fundamentals if I'm ever teaching that one again. So follow through and overlapping action is the tendency for objects to not all stop at the same time, right? If I were to take off running across the room, not going to, I'm tired, my shirt would drag along behind me, and when I would stop, it would follow through and come and settle to a stop, right? And so when we're doing animation, it's very easy to make, or it's very easy to fall into the habit of making everything hit at the same time, right? My character goes from pose A to pose B, and everything hits pose B at the same time, and then everything hits pose C at the same time, and then everything hits pose D at the same time, right? And that's not really how things work, right? We're a lot more loose, and we have to sort of incorporate that and force that to happen, because all of the methods in which we create animation, it doesn't happen naturally, right? So a good example of this, and you'll all be doing an animation with this in Animation Fundamentals, is sort of this arm, right? The platform is leading that motion, and then the little pendulum arms underneath kind of follow through and react to that, right? And you'll see we do several of these as little tests. And you can just see that overlapping action that's happening underneath there is a very important part of that. And we see this a lot in any sort of limb animation, right? The upper arm is stopping, the forearm follows through, the hand follows through after that. And they're all hitting that up pose and that down pose, they're just hitting them at slightly different times, right? And as we have those things happen later down the timeline, it feels like the upper arm is leading that and the hand is sort of following along behind. Now, when we say this overlapping action, we can have this happen in a lot of different ways, right? This overlapping action tells us something about the object. Like, I'm not sure about the purple thing, but that little orange string dangling below, what's some words you would use to describe it?
Light.
Light, right? It's very, any other?
Weak.
Bendy, weak,
Flowy.
flowy, flexible, right? This is like a piece of ribbon being dragged along behind it, right? Maybe a piece of like fabric or rope, maybe. Versus this one. That one's got a different. It's still got overlapping action, but it's reacting differently, right? It's like a.
It's like a cable wire.
Yeah, or you say like an antenna, right? Like for your on your car, right? Or a fishing pole or
What are
something.
those for?
For the radio.
$1 million question.
So that's a great. That's. Oh, wait, that's awesome. I know. I
I
don't.
always wondered because
Life
they put
in a
little
nutshell.
smiley faces all the time, and I wasn't sure if it was like decoration.
No, that's a good. No, fair enough. Fair enough. Like, I mean, like it's. I think. I'm still blown away too. Like I'm the same way. I don't listen to the radio. I listen to Spotify and everything. It's okay. No, I love it. But that's one of the great things about. It's like the little floppy disk on Microsoft Word. It's like your save button. Yeah, and everybody's like, "What is that thing?" Like, it's the same way that like my phone button looks like a rotary dial like phone like from 1950. Right? It's like icons and stuff like that. But yeah, it's so you can get the radio signal too. So it's got that springy like stiff feel to it. It's still overlapping action, but that overlapping action tells us something about the material this is made of, right? Fabric has hair, anything that's sort of loose has a lot of overlapping action. Okay, on to number 6, slow in and slow out. What time is this class over? 2. Okay, we're gonna be quick. Okay. Do y'all need a break?
Yes.
Okay. No. I see. Or should we muscle through? So.
Oh, you want to take a break, Professor Milo?
No, I just don't want to.
I want to know how you feel.
How do you feel?
You're so sweet.
Scientist majors, get in there.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break. It is 12:37. I could use a refill in the water anyway. We'll hop back in here because the whole thing with I was planning on letting y'all out kind of like early, but I feel like that took up a little bit of time. I think we'll still get out of here relatively early. So yeah, let's take a quick break. We'll come in. We'll knock out this last half, and yeah. Yeah, well, we'll start back in, let's say, 10 minutes. So it's 12:38. Let's say 12:48. That way we're not spending too much time on it. Yeah, you can probably make it back in that time.
I don't make it I don't have the patience for Dogbert. I hear that a lot, but once you get into it, it's like a lot of fun. Oh, yeah.
He has a $2 mandala tattoos to represent me and my sister, and they're done completely in dotworks.
Oh,
Yes.
Is this your sketchbook or is it a book of sketches that you bought?
I painted that first.
Oh, you did that.
Yeah. It was nice. Thank you.
Okay, I thought you bought a sketchbook that had those.
No, that's one of my characters.
I like that.
Thank you.
It's not my friend.
I know it's still
I was originally going to do a cityscape in the background. My gouache made it look so funky, so I just took water to it and made it like water texture.
What's your name?
With that.
translate y, which is up and down, right? So, does that make sense? So, if your object is moving steadily forward and your up and down happens in an arc, then it will make an arc too, because time is also progressing forward, right?
Okay.
So really, when you think of the up and down values in your graph and your change, or the up and down direction, the change in the value you guys selected, just translate by. The side to side is time, and so that means as time progresses, it's going to move forward. Does that make sense? Graph editors are hard. It's hard to wrap your head around, but.
Yeah.
Well, I tried using my ID books, and I realized that you can't use it on those vending machines. So I was like, okay, I'll go grab my debit card. My debit card wouldn't work, so I had to look through all of my dollar bills to find $2. I'm like, I just want a Gatorade.
Oh, goodness gracious. Lock that, close that. Okay. I think other people will come trickling back in with Cookout any minute now. So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and get Wendy's. Yeah. If they went to Wendy's, it's going to take them at least another 10 minutes. So let's hop back in. Number 6, slow in and slow out. All right. So what we're talking about here is how something comes to a stop and how something starts moving, right? We could say acceleration or deceleration. We kind of talked about this with our car, right? Remember when we took that curve, when we broke those tangents? So it didn't appear to accelerate and decelerate. But if you wanted your car to stop at a red light, you would want it to slow down, right? If it just was moving along and then just stopped dead, it would feel like it hit something, right? And so what this is called is, or this principle that this is based off of is called slow in and slow out. And that's that an object has a tendency to kind of ease in and out at the beginning and end of a motion, right? Like it eases out of the beginning, goes fast to the middle, and eases in. Now, sort of associated with this slow in and slow out is something we'll talk about later, which is called spacing. And since we're dealing with frames of animation, right, individual drawings, it's the distance this object travels every frame, right? So if an yes.
Are these 12 principles the reasons why we have to learn about physics as part of the, like, this is a serious question, I'm curious.
It is a serious question.
So true.
I think so. I understand that physics class makes you learn about physics in a way that seems not intuitive for this. But it is the core of why things are moving the way they are in the physics class. Yeah, that's why to get a bachelor's of science degree, you have to take so many sciences, and we're like, physics makes more sense than geology, right? And so that's why that's the one that's in the curriculum.
I didn't know if it had like a direct correlation to these 12 rules.
Not
itself.
1-to-1, but I do think that there's a lot of things at least from, in all honesty, like I always try to teach some of these classes as physics for artists. It's like all of the math parts of it, you're probably not going to be doing a lot of that. You're basing it off of aesthetics. Does that look right? But yeah, that's why it's in there. These 12 principles, I'm sure they kind of understood them, but I think you find most of this in Newton's laws, right? The 3 laws of motion. And you can see sort of a relation to a lot of these in that. And so with that, again, like this is that energy changing form, right? If your object just stops dead, then we would say, well, it must have encountered another object, right? I just can't see it, right? It must have hit an invisible wall. And it'll feel like that. So yeah, this spacing is the distance it travels each frame, right? Because we have to have 24 frames in a second of animation. If something is traveling a big space from frame to frame, how is it moving? Fast, right? If it's traveling smaller frames, if it's traveling a really small frame, it's going to seem to move really slow, right? And so what we're seeing is this change in this big spacing to a small spacing, right? And that's a deceleration and an acceleration. So to sort of explain this, one of our other principles is timing, right? And we'll talk about it more, but timing is the speed in which something happens. And so the timing of this animation is 10 frames. It's taking 10 frames from these polygon shapes to go from one side of the screen to the other. But they're all doing it with different types of slow in and slow out, right? So it's the same timing. They're both starting and stopping on the same frame. They're just transitioning differently. And if you want to see that, this is the spacing for that. The spacing on that top one was very even, right? This is linear spacing. This one, it accelerated. That spacing got bigger and bigger every one of these, and then it feels like it slams into the wall. And this one has this big acceleration, or this boom out of the gate, and then it slows down. So if we watch that again, you'll feel like, this place is so clunky. That top one feels like it's moving pretty evenly. This first one feels like it's speeding up and then like smacking against the wall. And then this one feels like something is like knocking it forward, right? And so that's what what effects we can get just by playing with the difference of the easing and the slow in and the slow out. So again, this is an interesting one because slow in and slow out those are just words, right? It's not saying they're good. It's not saying they're bad. It's saying that's something we have to pay attention to as animators, right? Now, as an animator in 3D, we can graph that change with a curve, right? And that's why we use the graph editor to control a lot of that. If we want something to feel like it's hitting the wall, like it goes in fast and hits that point really hard. If we want it to feel like it's slowing in, it kind of eases in. And I think this is just a great example of like how different curves affect this change back and forth, right? And so you get kind of the difference in that, and how we can adjust those curves to change and refine that motion even more. Okay, so slow in and slow outs. Number 6 is arcs. Now, arcs is interesting. Arcs are interesting. Arcs are interesting. So what this means is things naturally have a tendency to move in an arc, right? That seems kind of simple and maybe overgeneralized because we animated a car driving kind of in a straight line for the most part, but then we had it curve around, and when it was doing those curves, it's curving in an arc. It's not transitioning in these straight lines, right? The reason for that is because most motion that happens because of an organic creature, like an animal or a human, right? Most of that motion is the result of a rotation, right? So this pendulum is not moving from side to side. It's swinging from a fulcrum, right? From a pivot point, right? And just like my arm is pivoting at the shoulder, right? So if I raise my hand up in the air, my hand doesn't travel like in this like straight line up to the air. It travels in a sweeping arc, right? And that's because it's based off this rotation of a joint, not off of a translation of an object. Now, that is that's challenging because a lot of Maya wants to animate stuff in straight lines, right? If you say point A to point B, it knows the easiest way to get from point A to point B is in a straight line. That's just maybe not going to look like the natural way, right? And so we have to kind of solve those issues. If we're having a character's arm animate, we realize we just need to rotate it from the shoulder to get that natural arc, right? Now, the interesting thing is arcs are happening everywhere all the time, right? Like if you look at how people are moving, like I love this picture because like their hands are wet, and as they're moving them, you can see the arcs of his path, right? If you find an animation of someone running or something like that, trace frame by frame, trace the dots of their foot, and it's going to move in an arc, right? And animators have to utilize that. This is from an animation that is hopefully coming out soon called, I think it's called Klaus or Claus. But it's, yeah, have you guys seen the trailer for it? This is actually, if I'm not mistaken, this is in 2D, but it's done in this like really pretty rendered painter way. But this is just tracking the arcs on everything. Tracking the arcs on his nose, tracking the arcs on his arm. That purple one is the arcs of his hip, right? And everything are moving in these little tiny swoopy arcs. Right? And that's going to feel more natural because arcs happen naturally even in areas that you may not think, right? When we take something like a cannonball, right? This is my second usage of a cannon as an example. Apparently, I'm interested in cannons right now. If you fire a cannonball out of a cannon, right, it seems like as soon as it's leaving that barrel, it's traveling in a straight line, right? But eventually, that energy that you put into it, like you packed a bunch of gunpowder in, I don't know how cannons work, right? You did something, I don't know what you did. And you fired this cannonball, that was this explosion of energy that caused it to travel straight forward. But it's not in a vacuum, right? We didn't fire a cannon in space. We fired a cannon on Earth, and Earth has gravity, Earth has wind resistance, Earth has friction. It has all of these other forces that are constantly interacting with that object. And so over time, when like more than one thing is pulling at that at a time, we're going to eventually see that respond as an arc, right? My very, very weak little illustration of that, right? Eventually it starts to arc down, and we still see this happening as arcs, as gravity takes a hold of it and causes it to change gradually, right? So arcs are everywhere. Like it's something that we really like, and software has a tendency to not want to create arcs. That's why you get paid money, is to make sure that it does it correctly, right? Okay, number 8, secondary action. Secondary action, let's just watch something really quick. Let's see if y'all know who this is. Never mind. Let's watch it in a different viewer. Apparently I can't watch it in that one. With VLC.
Why does he
Charlie Chaplin.
That's a I was having a brain fart.
So, Charlie Chaplin is used by animators as an example a lot because he was silent film, but he's a very well-known character. So, for those of you who are not as familiar with him, Charlie Chaplin is the actor. The character he's most well known for. Anybody know what it's called? This character. It's called. Well, The Kid was one of the movies that he was in. It was The Tramp, right? So and I know that the tramp as in a homeless person or as a beggar at the time, right? So this is a really interesting character. The Tramp, Charlie Chaplin's main character, is essentially a homeless person who thinks he's an aristocrat, right? And that's I guess like kind of loaded with some social commentary, I'm sure, of the time. He was a brilliant actor, actually. And so that's what it is he would literally be like stealing food, but he wasn't worried about getting caught because he would get arrested. He was worried about getting caught because he didn't want to be embarrassed, right? He was very high society in the way he acted, even though he was very down on his luck, right? And this was a very well-known situation that his character was always in. So that's what most of these films are, is Charlie Chaplin walking around trying to make it through his day every day in a dignified way, right? And so I bring this up because what is Charlie Chaplin doing in this shot? He's walking, right? That is if an animator was like, well, we got to get Charlie from this side of the city to the other side of the city, how are we going to do that? Is it a jetpack? No, he's walking, right? So the purpose of this shot, Charlie was walking, right? But that's not all he's doing. Like, what's he doing while he's walking?
Bending the walking stick.
Yeah, he does a little king flex thing, right? He's smoking. I love this right here. I think he's dusting off his jacket because he doesn't want any dust to be on it. Right? He's smoking a cigar. Even the way he's walking feels like that, chest out, very proud. Like, so his primary action is walking. His secondary action is all of that other stuff he's doing. Right? All those little bitty things, and those things are not getting Charlie to the other side of the street, but those things are adding character to who we see him as. Right? So your secondary action, the principle number 8, is actions that add to the personality or the acting of a piece, right? It could be like eyebrow flares, or it even can be lip sync, right? I can sit here and talk and not do anything else. My mouth is just moving. I'm standing as my primary action. My secondary action is my mouth is moving a lot, right? So secondary action is the little stuff that adds texture, adds personality to an animation. A lot of people will consider stuff like tails or hair also secondary action. But to me, like the one that I love, like the best example of secondary action, Celia May, right? Because if you watch this, all of those little snakes add to whatever she's feeling, right? Like if she's flirting with Mike, they're all like all being coy, and some like every one of them has a slightly different personality. So it's a great like example. Each of those little pieces of hair is a secondary action to what she's doing, right? Okay, number 9, timing. Timing is an interesting principle, right? And it seems self-evident, right? To say timing is a principle of animation. It's like saying food is a principle of cooking, right? It's like, of course, you need timing for it to actually animate, right? If it wasn't happening over time, it wouldn't be animation. But what this is saying is really, like you can just add the words pay attention to, right, at the beginning of this. And then it's an instruction, because we're really bad at predicting timing and stuff, right? Like, watch somebody run sometimes, like run from that side to that side, and be like, you watch it happen, you'd be like, I don't know, that was somewhere between 5 and 25 seconds, right? Like, it's really hard for us to, I'm gonna put 30 seconds on the microwave to heat up my donut while I run to the other room and put some clothes in the laundry. Like, I'm not even out the door before that 30 seconds is up.
30 seconds.
Your donut's gonna explode.
You're right, 10.
Exactly.
Good. Okay, keeping me honest. Right, we're just not good at that, right? And so we have to make an effort to make timing better, especially because when we're doing animation, timing is just the number of frames it takes for something to happen, right? So this is a ball traveling from point A to point B. This animation is 100 frames long, right? This takes 100 frames for this action to happen. And that means that the spacing is really small, but the timing is sort of slow, right? Like if you would describe this thing's action as like it's not in a hurry, right? It's kind of slow going from point A to point B. Now I can do the same action in 10 frames. Feels a little faster, right? Timing is something you have to consciously make an effort to control, because when you start watching your animation, you're just going to set 2 keyframes on like frames 1, frames 120, whatever. And Maya is going to cause that animation to happen, and you're going to watch it over and over and over again, and eventually you'll be like, that timing feels about right. But it doesn't. You've just gotten used to it, right? You've gotten used to the fact that it feels slow, or that it looks slow. And so timing is hard for us. Like, timing is one of the things that most animators struggle with. Because the difference in something feeling urgent and feeling peppy may be 1 frame, right? It may be 1 frame faster if you want it to feel urgent, right? So timing, like really, again, it's pay attention to timing. Number 10, exaggeration. This is where I kind of get y'all back a little bit. This is a long list here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up some images, okay? And as soon as I pop them up, I want you to tell me who that is an image of, right? Okay, y'all ready? Here we go.
Oh,
You.
Me?
Joe McKinney.
So I heard a few Bruce Willises, right? Like we can hopefully you recognize it. What is this called?
Is it, oh my gosh, I know what it is.
it's a caricature.
I know it wanted me when they had the multicultural event.
Oh, yeah.
People paint these.
Yeah, this
Every
is
event.
this is that thing you get when you're at the fair or at the festival downtown or whatever, and usually it's like
It's really interesting to see how they interpret pictures.
yeah, they always have me chasing cake for some reason.
Oh.
No.
We
Oh.
don't cheesecake these nowadays.
Okay, let's try another one. Ready? Okay, who is this?
Who doesn't recognize that?
I love this one, right?
I like the name of the image. It's awesome caricatures for you.
Awesome Caricatures 41. I'm sure I stole this from somebody's website. Ready for number 3? Ready?
Bill Clinton.
So, which Bush?
W.
W. Right? Okay, one more. Ready?
Bill Murray.
Who doesn't love that? Bill. Zombieland.
Love this one. This is a sculpture, right? So,
That would be such a cool. Okay, imagine that face in like a stop motion film like Paranorman.
oh
That
yeah.
would be really cool.
So, but how many of you recognize this as Bill Murray, or at least, even if you couldn't remember his name, you recognize that? Oh, he's that actor in that movie, right? You need to watch more Bill Murray films if you did not recognize this as Bill
Because
Murray.
they exaggerate his most.
Yeah.
I love this because you all have already you've already said the principle, right? Exaggeration. Now, the reason we recognize Bill Murray as Bill Murray, he's Venkman from the Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason you all pretty ubiquitously, people can recognize these, at least a few of these people that are in these caricatures. But that does not look like a living human being. Like if I was walking down the street and I saw this person, I would not be like, oh yeah, that's just some dude, right? Like I would be like, oh, that is an alien or something. Like these are not human proportions.
That looks like the dude from the Goonies.
Right, yeah. It is very this is very warped and not realistic in terms of proportions, but most people can still recognize it, right? In fact, there's a study, I keep quoting this and then I never go back to my office and search to see if it's true. I've heard this quoted before. There's a study that showed that more people could identify a caricature of Prince Charles than a photograph of Prince Charles, right? Why is that?
Is he the one with the?
Show us a character. Show us a character. We might recognize you.
Which one's
Oh,
That's
King
right.
They all have
Fair enough. So I think this is interesting though. Why can people recognize caricatures?
They exaggerate the most prominent, like physical features.
Right. So people think exaggeration just means make it bigger, right? Like I'm gonna exaggerate this drawing of somebody's head. I'm just gonna make their head bigger, right?
Big forehead.
Yeah.
Head huge.
So that exaggeration isn't just making it bigger. Exaggeration is making it clearer, right? Making it. And so what I like to think of it is like, if you were able to boil Bill Murray down to his essential oils, right? the essence of Bill Murray, right? And then a vial.
Question for this is This is going on camera, isn't it?
I'm sure.
So if the police ever hear,
I did not.
Bill Murray.
I did not boil Bill Murray.
Bill
I
Murray.
said- I said the very legal,
Very
clarifying term of if. If someone were to boil Bill Murray down to the the essence of Bill Murray, right? That's what they crafted this out of. They took what is it that we think of Bill Murray as. Let's exaggerate those features, right? It's not just make his, like what if they're like, I'm going to do an exaggeration. I'm going to make his eyes huge. Well, we wouldn't see that as Bill Murray because you think of him as kind of squinty, kind of beady-eyed, right? I love the asymmetry of it because like he's always kind of got this weird like asymmetrical pose on his face. That was an impersonation if you missed it. It wasn't a good one. like they've taken the essence of these characters, essence of who we think of these people, right, and boiled it down to that. And I mean, obviously, like you have to accentuate sort of his like little smirk and his bald head to get the essence of Bruce Willis, right? So this is huge in terms of like comics. Like if you ever read like editorial comics, it doesn't matter who is in office. Well, I mean, it does matter who is in office, but no matter what year you look at it, go back and look at editorial comics for the politicians who are in office at that time. Like right now, if you open up a newspaper, you're going to find 5 different interpretations of Trump or Pelosi or whoever's running for Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, whatever. You're going to find all these different ones, and we're still all going to be able to recognize them, right? Because they've taken something that is sort of a thing that they do, right? Was it Bush that did this a lot? Like, yeah, he's always making his gestures like this, and so you would find these political cartoons where they were doing this, right? You take this thing that people use to interpret that and you clarify it, right? Now, why am I talking about all of this? This is illustration ideas, right? But this is the same in motion, right? Whenever you're trying to convey motion, you take the essence of tired, the essence of excited, the essence of whatever that is, and you exaggerate that, right? So exaggerating a sneak doesn't mean make it faster. It means make it sneakier, right? Like really stretch out that like slow creep forward, right? Whatever that is, exaggeration is taking the essence of that. And so if you look at some characters, they are like Bugs Bunny is just like walking exaggeration. Whatever it is he's trying to convey, he's a crying baby, right? He's going to push it, right? He's pushing it to the extreme, and whatever, like freaking out, right? Or he's sad, right? Like completely still, right? But that is so like hit that pose, be completely still. It's not that it's bigger or more motion; it's that it's clearer, right? And clarity is king. And so that is something that that is what we have the principle of exaggeration here for. Okay, so solid drawing. We're doing this on the computer, so I guess we could skip that one, right? No.
Yes.
Oh, I just got to talk about 2 more. I was hoping. So solid drawing was, I mean, these were being written by people who were doing 2D animation with drawings, right? And so when you think about that, like that means what they were saying is we have to be able to redraw the character the same way every time, right? Solid drawing means that Bugs Bunny's head always stays the same size. Like Mickey Mouse's hands always stay the same shape. This is one of the ways they did that. They would do what they called model sheets, or even like these pose sheets like this. And all of the animators would have a copy of these, and it was proportional things, such as lady's head is this proportion to her rib cage, right? And so you could, doing drawing after drawing after drawing, make lady seem like it was not only drawn by the same person over and over again, even though different people were working on it, but that she didn't change. She stayed on model. That's what they called that, right? If her head started getting too big, they would say she's going off model, right? She's gone off model, or the animator went off model. But that isn't a problem for us, right? We just model a lady's head whatever size we want it to be, and go forward with it, right? Now, here's the problem with that idea, is that that's in there for some reason, right? And yeah, it applies to drawing, but solid drawing just means we're staying consistent to that character, right? And so, in was it 1984? Yeah, in 1984, I think it was. John Lasseter. Why does he have to? Anyway, John, why couldn't we just kept being a good person, John Lasseter? Anyway, like, why did you have to go ruin that? Anyway, so, oh, yeah, he likes to hug the girls in his studio a little too much. Yeah. So, well, I'm not actually even for sure if it's just the girls. I just know he's a little too handsy.
John Lasseter.
John Lasseter was the guy who kind of founded Disney with Ed Catmull, and kind of got founded Pixar with Ed Catmull, and really he was the director of Toy Story. He's been the director of a lot of stuff. He was the CEO of Disney. But before all of that, like really when it was the early Pixar days, back in I think it was 1990 or 1985, he wrote a paper, and it was applying the 12 principles of animation to 3D animation. And he wrote this paper. It was like a 15, 20 page article or journal entry, right? And submitted it to a conference called SIGGRAPH. SIGGRAPH still exists. Some of our students go there every year. Some of the teachers go there as well. It's the Computer Graphics Conference. It's not necessarily specific to any industry. Some of it's for entertainment. Some of it's for professional stuff. But he presented that paper at SIGGRAPH along with an animated short film, Luxo Jr. That's why we watched that at the beginning of it. And the point of that is to say solid drawing still matters. In fact, all of these 12 principles matter. Because up until that point, everybody was convinced that computer animation could only be used to create backgrounds, to create environments. And he said, no, I can implement all 12 principles of the 12 principles of animation into a single short film about this little lamp. There's squash and stretch in there, there's arcs in there, there's overlapping action with that little cord that flips down to there. All of the 12 principles are hidden in there. But of course you get to principle 11 and say solid drawing, and you can't just say skip that, right? You can't say, change our minds, it's 11 principles of animation. Why was solid drawing in there to begin with? And that was to say that the character is staying consistent throughout the animation or the film, right? Like, Homer is a crappy person, right? But if Homer did something absolutely despicable, like if he sold his kids into slavery or something, right? Like we'd be like, whoa, what? Like that is not Homer, right? Homer stays consistent. He messes up because he's a little selfish, right? And those things always cause trouble for his family. He's never intentionally mean to his family, right? On top of that, Homer stays consistent in a lot of other ways, right? His hair always has that M in it. That M is always to the right proportions, and he always has those two little hairs on the top, right? Any character you can think of, especially one that's had a series of movies. Anybody watch the Hotel Transylvania movies? Those are fun, ain't they? Like, yeah, they're not going to win any Academy Awards, but they're hilarious. Well, is it Vlad? Is that his name there? Vlad? Yeah. He is very consistent, right? Like he's a worrywart. He is a little self-conscious. He's like, I do not say blah blah blah. Right? Is it Dracula?
Yeah,
okay.
His father is
Vlad. Okay, yeah. So that's me just getting vampire lore confused. The original Dracula is based off of Vlad Tepes being Palos. Yes, I mean he's consistent throughout, right? What's the other one? The Mummy's always telling corny jokes, right? Like all of those things are personality traits. And so when John Lasseter, I feel like somebody wrote this paper with him. When he wrote this, he just said, Principle 11 still exists. We're just not going to say solid drawing. We're going to call it personality, right? And your character has to stay consistent to their personality. Ariel is who Ariel is, right? And if she changes halfway through that, we don't believe it any more than if Lady's head got bigger in Lady and the Tramp, right? And that would break that illusion. Just because the computer helps us maintain scale, that doesn't change, right? All right, we're almost there. Number 12, appeal. Okay. How many of you have a favorite Disney princess? Who's it? Sleeping Beauty? I mean,
Mulan.
Mulan. I saw some other hands.
Rapunzel.
Rapunzel?
I wrote what her name is, but it's not Princess of
Princess,
Tiana.
Tiana, yeah. Okay, so I always get a few hands up on that one. I don't know if like people are self-conscious about having a favorite Disney princess. I do. I have a favorite Disney princess.
I have a favorite Disney character, but not a Disney princess. Oh, Ariel.
Okay, I love Ariel. She's so sweet, right? Huh?
She's like, she and she's up there.
And she's so naive, like about the world, and like was it the Doodle Flapper, or like Dinglehopper, yeah. Like I love Ariel, and like anyway, let's try this one. How many of you have a favorite Disney villain?
Super villains are the best heroes.
So let's hear some Disney villains. You can just shout them out.
Warren's King.
Hades.
Who?
Warren's King. Black Cauldron.
Oh yeah.
Oh, what's his name? Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Frollo.
Yeah, from Troy, yeah.
The one lady's name from Emperor's New Groove.
Oh, yeah. Oh God, I love Emperor's New Groove so much.
Wait, I just forgot her name.
Ursula.
Or just like, oh, Dr. Facilia from The Princess of the Frog.
Oh yeah, I heard some Ursula over there.
Maleficent.
Super heroes Ursula.
Yisma. Does Sid from Toy Story count?
I think Sid from Toy Story definitely counts.
I'm so happy.
This is terrifying. People are making connections to the garbage mix. You got the same shirt as Sid.
I like the voodoo guy from Princess. I forgot his name.
That
I know
was
who you're
Sid.
talking about.
Yeah, him. I like
He
him.
was terrifying. That guy traumatized.
I love
The bear in Toy Story 3.
Oh, I know
Oh,
one. It's
yeah.
not Disney.
Yes.
The bear, oh yeah. So that's it. Like, interestingly, a lot more people have strong opinions about their favorite villains in Disney, though. Like, but that
Villain
seems.
makes the hero.
But yeah, that seems antithetical to what most people would think. Like, who has their favorite dictator? Like, who has your favorite serial killer? I knew you would have it. I knew you would. I don't want to.
What's favorite you mean?
Yeah, who has like that? That seems like why do you like the bad guy? You would think that shouldn't be right, but everybody does. In fact, the second book that Frank and Ollie wrote was Disney villains, right? Like they wrote a whole book about villains because people love the Disney villains. Wow.
They're more animals.
They're funner.
They're not as flat.
And I mean, they're not like horrible people, you know? They don't even
They're sympathetic.
It's not like Hitler or anything.
Yeah, because what's a hero without a villain?
Exactly.
Without the villain,
What's
this
my
movie
point?
wouldn't exist in the first place.
It seems like a hero's often deemed as perfect, while the villain actually shows their flaws and makes them more human.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Like like if your hero picks their nose, like they're gonna be like. You're thinking about that a little too long, right? Like you don't want that. What were you gonna say?
Villains have more fun with their job.
So they aren't always like they're fun to watch, but it's kind of that train wreck thing I mentioned, right? Like you can't stop looking. Like you want to know why that's that. And I'm going to tell you mine. My favorite Disney villain. Cruella.
I love when she's driving the car, she's so psychotic.
Wow. So other why I like Cruella, and I think it's what you said. Like there's more flaws. You can see more about her and ask more questions, and I'm free to like speculate, right? If I start speculating too much about my hero, then maybe I don't trust them anymore to go on this journey, right? But Cruella, like she is like so interesting to me. So she's a tiny, like thin, spindly skeletal character, right? Like her face looks like a skull. Her arms are like super bony, right? And she hides inside of the flesh of other animals, right? Like, she's covering all of that up with this big, fluffy, soft thing, right? She is a walking contradiction, right? She's a walking duality. She has like this very like pale face that she's put bright colors all over. Her hair has two sides to it. There's the white side and the black side, implying that like one of those isn't natural, right? Like she's changed one of them, right? It is this idea that she is constantly hiding who she really is to you, right? Even her name, Cruella de Vil, is cruel devil, made to sound fancy, right? Like, made to sound all like so. Even like she hides her hands, like she's wearing gloves all the time. She is like a mystery. Like she's just this walking mystery. And it makes me go, wow, was she like this in the first grade too? Like what happened to her to get her to be this person? She's not going to tell me. And I'm just going to keep watching because if she like happens to drop a hint, I'm going to pick it up and analyze it, right? Like it's engaging. She's so interesting. So when we talk about appeal, which is the 12th principle, people think we mean this. Right? Ariel is appealing, right? She's pretty, she's happy, she's fun, right? And that is a type of appeal, right? That is there. But yeah, she's predictive. And that is appealing, but that's not the only type of appealing. Appealing means you can't look away. Appealing means it's engaging. It pulls you in. It makes you want to know more, right? So I think it's important to recognize that appeal is something that sort of triggers who we are, right? Betty Boop at the time was very much about strong women, right? And like the illustration style was a little rough, like if we kind of compare it to even stuff being made at the time. But Betty Boop was this strong, flirty woman who knew what she wanted, and she went and got it herself. She didn't have to ask Popeye to do it, right? Or she didn't have to like ask a male character to do it. She was the hero, right? And that's appealing to people who wanted to see that on the screen, right? I know people who have Betty Boop tattoos, right?
I like how she looks in Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh yeah. Oh, I've not watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit in a while. So.
That's good.
So let's talk about one more character here. Y'all remember this little guy? Oh, so in case you're confused about which one it is, he's this one. Dumbo. It's so cute. I love Dumbo so much, right?
There's more life.
And so Dumbo is interesting though. Like I just pulled that up, and people in class said, "Oh, right." But again, he's a drawing, right? You remember Mufasa the other day when I traumatized you with that, right?
Scar is the best.
Oh,
Scar is the best hero.
So the reason we say "aw" is because we are genetically wired to say the same thing about this, right? And even though you are all in college and probably not like eager to get one of these right now, if you are, that's fine, nothing wrong with it. But if you were walking back to your dorm and you saw a baby laying on the ground, you'd be like, I should pick that up and take care of it. Right? We are hardwired to want to do that. Right? You're not going to be like, no, I should maybe call somebody and mention it. No, you pick it up and you're like, who threw this baby on the ground? That's not cool. That is and all of those features are here, right? All of the things that make us say "aw" about Dumbo make us say "aw" about this. The big eyes, the like trusting naivety of it. Like he is so trusting, right? He wants somebody to love him. He's a little Dumbo. Head proportionally bigger like than adults to the body, right? All of those are things that an animator is using to remind you of this. Right, to remind you that you are hardwired to want to take care of babies. Animators are leveraging your chemistry, your emotion, your genetics, everything against you to get a reaction out of you. And this is appeal, right? Like if they made Dumbo like they didn't base these proportions off this, then you may not find them as appealing and want to protect them as much. And that's why we all hate this kid. Right? This kid who picks on Dumbo, and then like Mrs. Jumbo like grabs him and like starts to spank him, and I'm rooting for him. I'm like, yeah, hit him harder, right? Like it's like, and this kid, like I'm so mad at this kid to this day. He doesn't exist, right? Like that is
still want to keep.
I know, right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about appeal. Animation is like, it is addictive. It's like a drug. Like once you start doing this and you see somebody react to it, or you get a reaction out of it, you're like, I want more, right? I want to animate more.
Does
And
that make us drug dealers?
no, drug addicts.
We take our own medicine. What are you
Exactly.
talking about?
So, oh, that's not it.
It's our medicine
no.
now. It ain't a drug anymore.
Let's see if I have it. If I have it. I may not have it on here anymore. So, so I think that this is important to recognize that this is what you're doing. When we say appeal, this is you using common sense. What would be? It's not what is some other artist doing. It's not what is. It's you using your ability to communicate with other human beings and say, this is going to evoke an emotion out of someone. Animation comes from that. It's the same root word that we're getting animal from, right? It's to breathe life into, right? And so you are able to use that to craft something that is going to make someone have the feels, right? And so in some way or another, whether they get mad at it, I wish I had it on here. I had one of my favorite animations. Yeah, here it is. I need to copy this in there. So this animation was something I did for Civilization 5. It was one of the expansions. So I haven't really told you about my history too much. I worked for Firaxis Games for 5 years in-house. I still contract for them and a couple of other studios. And this was not the hardest animation. This one took me probably 3 hours, right? But Joey Ramone had only died a few years before this. And they were like, we're gonna do this music band, and it's gonna be this like group. It's Kurt Cobain as the singer, Joey Ramone as the guitarist. They have this metal drummer, and it was so much fun, right? I got to make this happen. This was something to me that, like, just looking at it myself, I just watched it forever. I was like, this makes me happy. I got to do this, right? It's not the hardest animation. It's not even in my reel because it's not the best animation. But it feels really, really good to do it, right? And there's that's the thing that you're looking for when you're looking for a career, right? If you can find something that is like, I really love doing this, like, and somebody's going to give you money for it too, right? That's awesome, right? Like, animators have, a lot of people do, have what they call imposter syndrome, where when they're sitting at their desk, they're like, somebody's going to know that I'm just doing this because I enjoy it, and I'm thinking they're going to stop paying me, right? Like, you think that, like, but this is so much fun. And so I think that that's one of the things that's probably Frank and Ollie were trying to say with appeal as well, right? Is that you get to make things that get reactions out of other people. You get to make things that you want to see exist in the world, right? And that's an awesome job. So, all right. That's the 12 principles of animation. I will say...
Well, can we see your reel? Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yes.
All right, I'll pull it up. That's why I made it, was to show it to people. I will say, watch through these. This has got a lot of great examples that this guy's created. And if you needed some proof that I'm long-winded, at the top here is a quick 2.5-minute explanation of all 12 principles of animation. It can be done in 2.5 minutes, but why when you can do it in 2 hours? Yeah, let me look up.
Really now? Look up the rabbit taming heavy. Rabbit heavy taming engineer. Google.
So this is a interesting one. When you apply to a job in animation, you're just making animation, or you're just putting together a video example of all of the animations you've done. That way you can show it to somebody and say, watch this 2-minute thing to convince you that I'm able to do the job you want me to do. So I'm actually going to go ahead and stop the video just so because you can always find this just by Googling it. So